also have managed to access visuals from the Straits of Hormuz as well, the key lifeline, the key artery as far as energy supplies to different parts of the world are concerned. These are some of the visuals of the ships and tankers that have been stranded near the Straits of Hormuz. As many as 20-odd Indian ships continue to remain there. Some of them, of course, have managed to secure a safe passage through those straits into eventually Indian waters. Remember that India has been part of a diplomatic outreach to Iran as well to ensure that its supplies of energy are not significantly interrupted. At least 3 ships have managed to make their way through the Straits of Hormuz, eventually into Indian waters. But 20-odd ships still remain, and negotiations continue between India as well as Iran so that they too eventually can secure a safe passage through these extremely sensitive waters. What you're currently seeing on your screens right now are visuals of Indian ships, among others, of course, from the Straits of Hormuz. Let me go across to my colleague Rishabh for more on this. Rishabh, there have been interministerial briefings held by different government ministries on multiple days now for almost 4 to 5 days straight. And they've, of course, been highlighting the negotiations that have been underway between India and its Iranian counterparts in ensuring that Indian ships secure a safe passage through these extremely sensitive waters. Of course, there has been a disruption of supplies, no doubt, but some ships have managed to make their way through, and more ships could possibly continue depending on how those negotiations pan.
Well, Siddharth, if we talk about Strait of Hormuz, definitely that is a point which Iran has now ensured that without their grant, without their permission, nothing can move from there, not even a small boat. And that's the reason that now Iran is using it as a leverage in this whole war. Now that, when it comes to India and Iran have been negotiating, and there have been a number of calls that have happened between the two sides. The Prime Minister himself has spoken to the President of Iran, the External Affairs Minister, at least at 5 occasions, if not less, have spoken to his counterpart in Iran. And there have been 3 to 4 ships that have also been allowed to move from Strait of Hormuz. While India wants to ensure that the security needs of the energy security needs of India is, maintained, India also wants to ensure that this happens diplomatically and no force is required.
Absolutely, and around 22 ships is what has been said during that interministerial briefing 3 days ago, Rishabh, and some more tankers have managed to make their way through. However, those 20-odd ships of extreme importance as far as our own energy supplies are also concerned, and not just energy, they're also carrying chemicals and fertilizers too. What can you tell us about the kind of negotiations that are underway between India and Iran to ensure that they also eventually manage to come through?
Well, see, we need to understand something. For Iran, the whole of Strait of Hormuz is a leverage that they want to continue using. Iran now understands that, in the symmetric warfare with Israel and US, it is difficult for Iran to sustain for long. But this asymmetric warfare, attacking the Gulf countries, holding things on Strait of Hormuz, ensuring that the US bases in Iraq, Syria, or Iraq, for that matter, in Qatar or Bahrain or UAE is attacked. This way, Iran, in a way, wants to exert that pressure on US that they stop the war. Because Iran do understand that if the war even stops now, there is no guarantee for future. So, when we say that, what happens to the energy security and how will that be and how Iran and India are negotiating, a lot now depends on Iran here. More than US and Israel, a lot now here remains on Iran, that how they take these things forward. And that is something that we are looking at. And that one thing is very clear. In the 19th day, against all the predictions that were made, Iran still stands very strong.
Yes, and Rishabh, what is this latest indication or the latest escalation that we witnessed in the Gulf with Israel, of course, striking South Pars, and then Iran retaliating by striking a key energy installation in Qatar. What kind of implications does this now have as far as the Straits of Hormuz is concerned?
Israel goes and attacks this LPG field, and then Iran hits back. US president decides to put a social media post, and in a way, in part one of the social media posts, it looks like US has thrown Israel under the bus. That it was Israel was angry, they did that, and it was Qatar was innocent. So US definitely doesn't want things to escalate when it comes to the Gulf countries, Qatar, UAE, Saudi, or for that matter, Bahrain or Oman. US have their interest in these areas, and and US does not want things to escalate further in the Gulf countries. They want the war to be contained in Israel, Iran, and not further. And that's the reason that we saw that statement. Furthermore, U.S. President did go on to say that there will be no further attack on Qatar if Iran doesn't do anything. So a lot of ifs and buts there, but U.S. trying to wash their hands away of any mishappening that takes place in Gulf countries.
And Rishabh, Qatar has had an interesting set of responses. It's condemned Iran for having targeted the Ras Laffan gas installation, and it had also criticized Israel for targeting South Pars in Iran. So Qatar appears to now be caught in a quagmire where it has condemned Iran, it's also condemned Israel, and the Americans are, of course, trying to assure the Qataris that their installations will no longer be targeted. What we're also witnessing is increasing frustration on the part of these Gulf countries over the actions of both the United States as well as Israel. Rishabh.
Well, so let's see what is happening here. The net security promise that US has made to these Gulf countries, that has gone for a toss. Why were US bases present in Saudi, UAE, Bahrain, or for that matter, Kuwait or Qatar, or for that matter, Oman as well? The reason was very clear that you give us base, we will provide you a net security here in the region. No one would come after you. Iran has broken that myth. The moment the escalations happened, we saw that most of these bases were evacuated, which means that US left these bases and the local governments to fend for themselves initially. And now that Iran and its asymmetric warfare has involved all these places, US has an egg on the face that you cannot safeguard your interest. How will you give us or provide us the net security? And that's the reason that these statements are coming in, that we promise that nothing will happen to Qatar, we promise nothing will happen to Kuwait. But in reality, on ground, Iran has ensured that US's net security promise looks like a myth to everyone in the region.
All right. Rishabh, thanks for that. We have another piece of important breaking news now, which is that, of course, what you're seeing currently on your screens right now are exclusive visuals that Times Now has managed to access from, of course, the Straits of Hormuz. It continues to, of course, remain a very sensitive situation there. We'll step into a short break. We'll come back with our coverage on the other side.